Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you're invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name's Eric Burgers, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Jake Polly and Nate.
Winnie.
How we doing?
Eric.
Winnie Nay.
I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, we get it, okay? You can say co-hosts, okay?
Hey, he got it.
In the moment,
proud of you.
I just can't do
Proud
it,
of you.
okay?
That's so funny.
Every time Nate's saying the intro now, like, there's just horses running around inside his imagination.
I don't know what it
my
is,
gosh.
okay? But I'm glad you can say it. So at least
Yeah.
two of us
He's
get it right.
saying the intro. He's like, don't say horse, don't say horse, don't say horse.
Literally, as I was saying, I'm so glad you can say co-host. Like right there, I had to say, don't say horse.
Yeah, that's so funny.
When
Oh my
Eric
gosh.
said that, I just had the biggest eye roll. I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, the biggest. I think his eyes disappeared for a second.
Yeah, my eyes rolled, and then my head started rolling too. I was like, oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. That's so funny. Man. Well, what are we talking about today?
I didn't even
Eric
say
just
that
stopped.
part. I just had to cover the co-host.
Eric abandoned ship.
Yeah, Eric just took a moment to make me feel bad for saying co-horses.
Eric
right.
paused this for a mock break.
Yeah.
Whoa,
brothers.
whoa, Nate, whoa.
Yeah. Dude, that's wild. Oh my gosh.
Oh
Nate's
my
like-
gosh.
Nate almost
Okay,
just
I'm done.
collapsed.
Today we're
Good
talking
thing I'm
about
sitting
marriage.
down.
Oh, whoa, boy. Whoa.
Today we're talking about marriage, not equestrian activities.
And
of
not
eye roll.
friendship. Yeah.
To be honest, I don't really know what direction we're taking the marriage podcast, but Jacob
Yeah.
has a number of questions we'll end up going through. Are we going to say how we're doing? I asked that and we kind of went off script on that too.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I was doing fine until I was mocked by my friend.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh
is
my
this
gosh.
a safe space, guys? Like, I don't think it is.
Oh gosh. Nate, how are you doing? You start and I'll go next.
I'm doing great. Yep, I went over to one of my friends' apartments and we watched the Tulsa Oklahoma State college football game, and Tulsa got blown out. It was like 45-10, and they scored.
That's really bad.
Tulsa
Wow.
scored one touchdown with like 3 minutes to go, and it was kind of sad. But the celebrations that they were popping off were just hilarious. I was like, gentlemen, this is not a good look for you, okay? You should just run into the end zone and then just immediately walk off the field and just like, next play. Like, let's just keep
Yeah.
it going, okay? That's
Yeah.
They should give the coach a top hat, and then if you're just getting beat so bad, they just walk to midfield, they just tip the cap to them, and then take the team and walk off.
yeah, right. Yeah,
so
it was
funny.
so bad. So
A
anyway,
top hat.
yeah, so we got to hang out, have some snacks, and chat around. So yeah, it was good. It was a good day, and now I'm here with you two, and we're gonna be chatting about marriage, which is yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So how are you guys doing?
I'm doing well. I just got back from Powell's. That's where I was before this.
jealous.
Yeah.
Powell's bookstore. And I told myself that I was going to buy at most one book. And I'll give you guys a guess. How many books do you think I walked out of that store with?
Oh, 8.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Dude, on the dime you got
seriously?
it. What the
Wow.
heck? Okay,
Okay.
what's up with Eric and these supernatural occurrences?
Okay. I gotta tell you. I also, because it just reminded me of this, I guessed Briar's birth as well. Like, I guessed the exact day that it would be like 2 months in advance.
Dude, what are the freaking odds that the guy that doesn't believe in prophecy is a prophet? What the heck, dude?
That's like,
That's a throwback to one of our old spiritual gifts conversations, so go check that out.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so I have 8 books now that I needed none of them.
Wow.
So yeah, that's how my day's been going. It was relatively cheap for all of those, only like
Walk us through.
$70.
Wow. That's not bad though.
Whoopsies. Yeah, not terrible. For 8 books is not too bad.
No, yeah.
I got a book by Bart, The Holy Spirit and the
Shocker.
Christian Life. I know, seriously. Watch this. Ready? I got Christ the Center by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And then I picked up Christ and Culture by what is the H? Helmut Niebuhr. I think it's Helmut. I've heard so much good stuff about Christ and Culture, and it's like a very common book discussed in like discourses over theology and culture. And I've never read it, and so I would love to like pick that up. And then for a project at work, I picked up Irish Saints, like different stories of Irish saints.
Interesting.
I picked up Praying with Francis of Assisi. Same project. 131 Christians Everyone Should Know. I figured there's at least
I read that for a class. Yeah.
there's at least 12 that I don't know yet. So no, I'm just kidding. So yeah, was it good?
Yeah, we didn't read the entire book, but the excerpts that we did read in that, I think it's pretty much, it's very general overview material. So from what I remember,
That's perfect. That's exactly what I need.
yeah.
Praying with Hildegard of Bingen. So another one of the Praying with series. And then I got this fat tome of a book, which is Blessed Among Us, Day by Day with Saintly Witnesses. So you can kind of sense a theme there, just different voices from church history and different stories. So,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah.
Cool.
And I'm going to read approximately 3% of all this. So
Yeah.
that's probably what
I
will
was
end
gonna
up
say
happening.
it'd be cool for us maybe sometime on the podcast to go through a book or something. Even make like a
Yeah.
couple episodes of like going through a book that we all read or something. That would be good when Eric's out of seminary.
Yeah, or when we completely run out of material.
that too.
We're like, I have nothing left to talk about.
Yeah, I on that same note, Jacob, when we moved out here originally, I've probably said this before, probably even on the podcast, but oh well, I'm saying it again. When we
Yeah.
first moved here, I like right before we came, my grandma called me and had like a friend who was a retiring pastor who was getting rid of like his whole library.
Ooh,
And
gold.
So I went in there. Unfortunately, it was at a time where I still didn't really like know nor understand who authors were, like good and
Dude,
bad.
that's the worst. I
was
had the
tough.
same thing happen to me once.
I
Oh,
went in
man.
there. I was like, man, dude, like I wish I knew what to look for. But-
Yeah.
So I did get a number of names that I did know and stuff like that. But anyways, so I have like 4 boxes of books that are still in Oregon that still haven't made it out here. So when you said I'm gonna read
Dude.
approximately 3% of these, I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right.
That sounds all right. You guys remember Dr. Graham from George Fox?
Oh yeah, I went to her
Totally.
thing too.
I did
think
too.
all of us
Yeah,
did,
the little... Yeah, so
I
we
took,
got
like, an
invited to like
entire
raid her
moving
books.
box. Like I got a huge,
Yeah,
like,
me too.
large moving box out of her.
Was awesome. But I went in there and I was at the end of like my kind of stint with Calvin and moving into Bart, but I didn't really know what Bart was all about yet. And so I ended up just picking up a bunch of books on Calvin that I no longer want to read, and I did not ask her for her advice on Bart, and she's literally a Bart scholar. Like she studied under the Torrance brothers who studied under Bart. And it was like I had a pipeline and I had no idea. Oh, it made me so angry when I finally realized what I had done.
If you're getting
So.
rid of your Calvin books, I'll take them.
Yeah. I'll ship them to you. I've got a ton of them.
So that's 5
Um,
boxes of books in Oregon now,
There
Eric.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what you're just
They're
invited.
big boxes too. They're like,
Yeah.
Dude.
I know they're big too.
So
I'm just curious because it's gonna be like Christmas because I'm gonna open it and like, what's in here? And see
no,
what-
Yeah.
it is the most fun. I just went through. I sorted through all my books. I had 2 big boxes down here, and I just got rid of a whole box. And going through those boxes, it filled me with so much joy to go through and just see all the books and authors that I had. And then I have a reading list of like 20 books right now that I'm trying to make my way through. And
That's
I have
aggressive.
like 5 tabs open on my computer right now of books that I'm intending to read.
Oh, totally.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I have so many of those. Yeah,
Um,
the add to watch list or whatever.
I don't know what it is for
wish
big
list.
boxes, but I know that the Postal Service has a book rate. So you can ship books using a special rate. So it's
Oh,
actually
interesting.
cheaper than like the weighted price would be.
Mm-hmm.
So
kidding.
yeah, so you might look into that. It might be cheap
Yeah, maybe.
to get all those to you. But
I
anyway.
will say, one time I shipped a book to somebody. It was a big book. It was like I think it was a biblical concordance. I was getting rid of it,
man.
and I sold it on eBay. And I think I sold it for like $10 to $20.
Wow.
And I kid you not, to ship it cost me $50. $50.
Since
I
y'all can't see, Nate and my mouth is
Wow.
on the floor. Dude.
jaw
That is
dropped.
insane.
I thought,
Wow.
and I had shipped books before, and they had always given me that discounted rate. And for some reason, this guy was just like, nah, fam, you're paying $50 for this concordance. And I was like, wow, I'm never using eBay again. Like this is a mess.
No
I made a
kidding, dude.
mistake.
Facebook
Just
marketplace.
wiped out my profit. Anyways, all right. Well, so, oh wait, Eric, did we talk to you about your day yet?
No, it's.
No, tell us about
we
your
have
day.
the longest. My day's great. Okay, let's talk about marriage.
Oh god.
Okay, all right. Wow. All right.
I did that
fine.
last time too.
Wait.
We're not gonna talk about Alfred or George
Whatever.
or
maybe.
Cannon.
Yeah, this will be the one time that somebody actually emails into the show. They'll email a baby name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'll be Cannon.
How crazy would that be?
That would be crazy.
That would be so wild.
Now somebody's
Um,
gonna do it just because you said it.
Right. If you
Right,
have
right.
baby name suggestions, hit them with the email, Jacob.
Yeah, sophomoros@gmail.com. That's SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com.
Or not
Perfect.
baby names. We'd love to.
Yeah, or
respond
just
to
like say
literally
hi, you know,
anything.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Anyways.
My gosh.
All right, let's talk about marriage. Goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about marriage, and mostly it's going to be me pestering these two boys about what marriage is all about, because I'm not a married boy, but they are. So it's kind of interesting. We've got Nate, who is married but doesn't have kids. We've got Eric, who is married and has a kid, and we've got single boy Jacob, who isn't married and doesn't have kids. So we have like all across the spectrum. Except for we're all males and we're all white, so the perspective is limited by that.
And
And we're all 25-ish. So
Yeah. Right. We don't have seasoned married people.
no, we do
Amateur
not.
married people.
So listen to us, because we're all smart and stuff. Definitely, we're not gonna get anything wrong in this. So my first question is, according to your understanding, what is marriage? Like, if you were to define it, how would you define marriage? And then the second question I'll have is just so we can differentiate. The second question is, how would you guys describe the purpose of marriage? So for this one, not necessarily the purpose, but just what is it, right? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, let me gather my thoughts for a second, just to because definitions are tough. You know, you want to be encompassing, but you also want to be broad
Yeah.
enough. I feel so.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, do you have an easy answer to that?
Yeah, I think probably the most bare bones definition you could possibly give, trying to rid as many implications as possible and get all the way to the roots. It's a one flesh union between one man and one woman, is what I would say. Probably.
What does one flesh mean to you? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that's. I wish I would do more study, particularly what that word means. But it comes from Genesis, obviously. Genesis 2, if I remember right. And it describes what I think to be, just off the top of my head, the physical union that, and there is probably, I don't know if you could argue that from the text itself. I'll have to pull it up just to reorient or reframe myself with it, but off the top of my head, it's the physical, intimate union between a man and his wife as they come together to form a new family unit with one another. I think is probably a decent way to describe it, just off the top of my head.
Okay. So when it says one flesh, in your understanding, that genuinely does mean like the unification of bodies.
It does in some sense. Absolutely, yeah, I would say that. That's definitely a part of it. I think there is something more thinking now that I'm thinking of a little bit broader in Genesis, because Adam, when he's first introduced to Eve in the beginning, also he goes through all the animals. He's searching for a suitable mate for himself, as per God's command for him, and nothing's working out. Nothing's particularly working. But then when God puts him into a deep
None of the apes were hot enough.
Exactly. When God puts him into a deep sleep and takes one of Adam's ribs and forms Eve, and he lays eyes upon her, he goes, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And I think, I don't know, you guys can tell me what you think. I think that does obviously mean something physical. Like, he looks at Eve and he's like, "Yes, this is me. This is the human race."
Yeah.
Like, we share a common identity with one another. But I think you could maybe make the argument that it has something more than just physicality in mind as well, and perhaps something spiritually connecting too. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
It's a good question. So let me go to Genesis 2. I've pulled up a bunch of scripture here. So it says, but for Adam, no suitable helper was found. Verse 21. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And when he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs. But by the way, in Hebrew, that's the word isn't ribs. It's just side. It's like just that whole area. Your side of your
They can't
chest.
see you, Jacob.
Probably. Yeah, that's right. Sorry. I just pointed to my, the right side of my rib cage. Took the man's side, you could say, and then closed up the place with flesh, right? So there we see that word. Then the Lord God made a woman from the side, from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." That makes sense in Hebrew. It doesn't really make sense here because our words are weird for it. But like if I'm not mistaken, the word, so ish is for man,
Yes.
and isha is for woman,
Yes.
and there's this idea of the directional hey,
Yeah,
which means
yep, that's right.
yeah.
I
so
just
there's
learned this like yesterday.
Oh, perfect, dude.
Yeah.
What is with you learning these things like right before we do?
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's like the directional hey means out from something. So if I went let's say, oh my gosh, let's say
Towards something,
I
I would say.
pulled something out of the drawer, right? If I pulled a knife out of the drawer, I could say that the knife was like, I would put a little H at the end of it, and that would mean that it was being pulled out from, right? So that's kind of the idea. Isha, that ah at the end is the hey. Sorry, that was like a weird nerdy little note. And then it says, okay, yeah, so this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman. She was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. So I think as far as like the word is used in context, it makes sense to me that there is something happening there that is like whatever Adam is saying to like as he sees the woman, he is saying something about the union, I think, because again, they will become one flesh is the next line down, right? Like, so I think contextually, the two being side by side like that makes me think you're probably right. Nate, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I pulled up an article and was reading a little bit about it to kind of wrap my head around a definition. one flesh is definitely the right direction to go in. That's scriptural, and it's a little bit of Christianese, you know. But I think you reading Genesis 2 is perfect. Yeah. Oh man. Sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts right now. I don't know why I'm going like
No problem.
almost blank-minded on this. One.
Just a little thing, Jacob. You said something coming out of. I think. Yeah, actually, yeah. That probably makes sense. The book that I'm actually currently going through for one of them, I'm taking Hebrew. For those who don't know, at the moment is my beginning Hebrew book, and it says the directive "hey."
Okay.
It describes motion toward a place. Essentially, is what is the quote from that book. So.
Oh, that's even more interesting, actually. Oh, that's interesting.
But I don't
so it's
think
not that it was
I don't
taken.
think that negates what you're saying, though, because
No,
in
you're-
order to go
but you're-
toward a place, you got to come from a place.
No. But think about that. Think about that. The woman is the one that is going towards man. That's beautiful because okay. Oh wow! I just had like a really cool little
Yeah, I see where you're
theological epiphany. So I don't want to go there too fast. We will later talk about Ephesians 5, but I just had like kind of a mystical click, you could say, with what this is talking about. Okay, cool. So
probably
yeah,
pull that
so
up
it's
in
not that the
further.
wife is coming out from man; it's the woman is going toward the man. Thank you for that. That was great, Eric. I'm super rusty in my Hebrew.
Hey there, I haven't. We're just beginning to actually work through biblical texts, translating them. So I haven't
believe
actually
there-
looked in here. I'm not sure my Hebrew is sharp enough yet that I could probably break it down, but
It's gonna suck if there's not.
But that would be
Yeah,
that would be pretty strong to kind of bolster the doctrine of headship, I would say.
Yeah. So, will you go ahead and describe the doctrine of headship really fast for someone who doesn't
jeez.
know what that is? I know I just threw you under the bus.
We just define marriage. It's like, Eric, define marriage and then define headship for us. Oh, jeez.
Oh
In
yeah.
trouble, but I don't
Yeah.
care. Again, I'll try to be as bare bones as possible. Headship is the idea that they're within the marriage unit. So I described it earlier as a one flesh union. So within that union or unit, there's particular. I'm going to conflate some ideas here, but it'll get
Yeah,
to
there's
the
a
point.
hey.
It'll get to the point. There's particular roles within that union that are designed by God for each partner within the union. And as a part of that union, the male has a particular leadership or leader type obligation within the marriage union. So that, again, bare bones as possible, it's to say that the male figure within a marriage union has a leadership role, basically.
And that in and of itself, is that doctrine universally accepted?
Oh, not even close.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just
especially
important
in the
to
especially
know.
in the 21st century. You know, I will say, before you get to, just to kind of make a broad claim about the way history has gone, I would say before the 19th century, I'm not sure that there's really any objection to the idea of headship. I'm like, unless you guys are just are aware of something that I'm not. Like, as soon as you kind of get to the 19th, maybe 20th is a better landing spot for that, and particularly the sexual revolution within America and the kind of reorienting of how its influence on the globe. Man, no, you know what? It's probably even before that, because I don't think it's particularly just an American idea. But as the modern era kind of comes into play, there's a shifting of how people view gender roles and how men and women relate to one another is what I'm getting at here. So yes, today the idea of headship, as I think it's found in Scripture, is very uncomfortable for a lot of people, particularly in America as well, in our own setting. However, I don't know that I would say that that's a norm throughout all of church history, as far as I know.
No, certainly not a norm. I think it was John Stuart Mill that was one of the first to, or I know he's an early voice, at least in kind of what would you say, first wave feminism, or kind of a breaking down of that idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's worth pointing out, at least, to say that, you know, even if there's a doctrine that comes into wide dispute in a certain time period, that doesn't automatically negate the doctrine, because especially if there's like millions of people who believed it in some form or fashion before that.
But that the same could be said, like, you and I are Baptists, so we don't believe in baptismal regeneration,
and yet not go there for now.
The entirety of the church before us did believe that. So that being said, like, there are times where you could say we believe that a doctrine, let's say, is not held for a very, very long time, but is the truth, and then at some point gets discovered or articulated in a new way by someone that's very late in the game, right? So, you know, we're Protestants. I mean, we have to believe that, or else we're kind of screwed, because a lot of our theology is, you could say, late.
I don't know if I agree with that.
And modernistic,
to be frank.
All right. Well, we can talk about that another time.
I don't want to get off topic here. So
sure. So, okay, Nate, did you have any headway on an idea for a definition or anything you wanted to add to what Eric said?
Yeah, Eric's was great. I think that the one, I don't know, I guess I'll just try and sprinkle some seasoning on this bad boy.
Love it.
I mean, I would define marriage as probably it's a covenantal relationship that.
Ooh, nice.
And so covenant there is binding. It's almost an agreement. We see covenants. We see non-marriage covenants throughout Scripture, particularly like one between God and Abraham, where God promises to make Abram into a nation of many, like essentially a great nation. So that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, and then gives him a new name, Abraham. So he becomes a new identity. So a covenant is in Scripture is often a dramatic moment where people are not the same as they were before the covenant. So they walk into
great
an
definition
agreement or a binding moment, and they walk out almost completely different than before they were in it. So
substantially changed.
Right. Yeah. So a covenant is a big deal, and so a marriage is a covenantal relationship that is founded on a couple of key principles. One being the forsaking of all others. Another one being just marriage vows in general. So essentially it's built on promises to forsake all others, meaning you stay with one person, stay with your marriage partner, and it's not through sickness and in health, through rich times and poor times. Essentially, it's a vastly important agreement to care for one another, and to love one another, which we can define love too. But maybe even more, like even in moments when you're not loving, you still have obligations to fulfill your covenant or your agreement to that person. So my definition might make it sound more like a complicated contract, but it's definitely more love based as well. So
yeah,
but I think that I don't know. I think marriages in particular that focus almost too much on love in general. Maybe we can talk about this later, but
ooh, yeah,
that would be an interesting thing to talk about, or to at least examine. Is love supposed to be the basis for anyway, that's kind of a rambling thought, but anyway,
we might have to ask the question, what is love?
Baby, don't hurt me. That's good. So anyway, to bring it back, a marriage is a covenantal relationship that's founded on a couple different promises that span a lifetime, spans a couple of very important areas of just like of life.
Yep, perfect. Great. So I would love to ask you the question now, and this is going to get a little tricky, I think. Is there an aspect of the divine or the holy at work in marriage? Meaning, is marriage something that like Nate said? Is it a covenant? Is it a contract? Is it an agreement between two people, and that's it? Or is it an agreement between two people that has something to do with God? What is God's role in marriage? / is there a role for God in marriage?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
I don't know that it's ever been posed to me, at least the first way that you said it. I'm sure somebody has said, "What's God's role in marriage?" to me before, but element of the divine is a tricky way to say it. I don't know. For some reason, I'm hesitant to say it that way. But you know, I'll just dive head first in it, and I'll say yes. I'll say yes because I think marriage is supposed to symbolize. Like I said before, I think the word union is really important. I do really like Nate's talk of covenant. It touches on something that I didn't. That I think is very important to the idea of marriage. But union is a very important word, in my opinion, for marriage, because the marriage union, I think, is supposed to symbolize or honor the union that exists within the Godhead itself, particularly between, not only that, but as you mentioned earlier, Ephesians 5, as well. It's supposed to symbolize the union that Christ has with his people as well, the Christ in the church. So there's kind of I don't want to say merely a symbolic role that God plays within marriage. I'm not sure I have the language to, just off the top of my head like this, to say God's role in marriage other than being ultimate provider and sustainer of all things. Including marriage itself, but in terms of like God's relation and how marriage is supposed to operate, I think it's supposed to operate under the authority and mimicry of God, I would say, and the union that exists between God himself as well as God and his people. So vertical and horizontal element to it there. So that's what comes to to the top of my head off
so
the rip.
For you, it's a representation, it's an icon of the holy unity of the Trinity and the unity between Christ and the church.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with Eric. I think the New Testament definitely paints that picture, especially Hebrews. Just like that picture of Christ loving the church as a man loves his wife, and then gives some really good imagery of how men ought to love their wives. And so yeah, I pulled up this article from Got Questions talking about one flesh marriage, and it has this section, and I think it's awesome. So it's talking about how God has a higher calling for marriage. So it's not just a relationship between two people. It's not just for the purpose of raising children or whatnot, but it acts as almost in three different ways. So I'll read this a little bit, or at least a part of this. So as individuals or serving Christ with their lives before marriage, they are to serve Christ together as a unit, and also to raise their children to serve God. As a couple pursues serving Christ together, the joy in which their spirit gives will fill their marriage. And so God being central in marriage today, if God is central in marriage today, there will also be joy. So there's almost a threefold, way in which God is central to the marriage, I think, at least just from what is floating around in my mind right now. So for one, I think that Christ is the sort of, what's a good way of saying it? Christ is almost the standard by which people can hold themselves to for loving their spouse, because of what kind of Hebrews paints for us, the way that Christ loves the church in sacrificial love. So Christ operates as not only the standard, but also the goal, so to speak. So you like what I'm trying to get at right now is that marriage has a purpose. Its purpose is to serve God and to act in a way in which Christ acts and is fueled by the Holy Spirit. So God is both the end goal and the fuel that gives a marriage power to even sustain those goals.
Can I even add an element to that?
Please.
So he's not just the end goal. He's not just the you could say the sustainer or the energy. In Mark 10 it says that they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So he's also the originator of marriage. He's the one that begins it. He initiates, pushes forward, and is the end goal of marriage.
Mm-hmm. I really like what both of you said, and I like what you said at the end there, Jacob, because I'm trying to think of it. I was thinking of my own answer there for a second, and trying to think of kind of the scriptural precedents for me saying that it symbolizes the union of the Trinity itself, because obviously you have the very blunt, open connection between Christ and the church in Ephesians 5, like we mentioned. I think maybe the reason I said that it symbolizes the union within the Trinity relates to kind of what you were saying there, and also what Nate said earlier with what's the basis for marriage, and I think it is love. So I think to make the argument for how it represents the Trinity and the union within the Godhead, the perfect union within the Godhead itself, is you'll probably have to take. I'm not sure that there's actually I'm pretty sure that there's no biblical text that says and marriage represents the union of the Trinity, but it's more of like a conceptual canonical approach, piecing together the Bible as one cohesive unit in what it says about God and human nature. So if God, basically, I think it would probably go something like this. God has perfect unity within himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They perfectly relate to one another and are equal in status with one another, all being divine, but having their roles within how they operate, I guess you could say. Navigating treacherous waters with Trinity language, but and I think if that's the case, and if it's also the case that God is the sustainer and provider of all things, as you find consistently Old and New Testament, without bringing up specific scriptures, I think it's fair to say then that the way in which human beings relate to one another in the institution that God himself designed, that's supposed to be the closest, most personal way possible, that it would represent that union, that unity which exists within God himself, is probably the way you could get there. Does that all make sense? That was kind of rambly and head thought.
It does make sense. I'm actually of the opinion, so I agree with you that it's an icon, that it's a representation, an analogy, you could say, of the relationship between Christ and the church. I have gone away from saying that it's an analogy of the Trinity.
Yeah, please.
For reasons of let's say where the analogy might break down, and the analogy breaking down,
that would make sense.
It has become a problem, especially, actually, I hate to say this, Eric, in SBC circles.
That's fine. SBC has
big, if you want to get into like some, huge wars talk about subordinationism. That'll get you there. And
okay. Sorry.
So
ahead.
subordinationism, the way that they have basically attempted to prove subordinationism, or to, kind of as an apologetic for subordinationism, is to take the marriage covenant and to socially map it onto the Trinity. And there's, like you said, there's no scripture that supports that. It's kind of just a theological rumination, which is, I guess it's fine, but I get skeptical of that. So because I'm not a subordinationist, and because I find that approach kind of backwards, I have gone away from describing it. But I do think that there's truth in that. Humanity is to give itself to its neighbor. Each human is to give themselves to their neighbor, and to receive their neighbor to themselves in a similar way to the triune unity. And I'm pulling there from John 17, the prayer for unity, right? Jesus says, may they be one with one another as you and I are one with each other, right? So I think there's that unity is there, at least between the members of the church. It should be. So I guess you could say by like indirectly, yes, within Christian marriage, because Christian marriage is you could say a microcosm of the church, or the smallest instantiation of the church, because it's two people who believe in Jesus, who are one. So anyways, but as its own kind of defense of that, I would say, I would drop it for myself.
Yeah, that's understandable. And to be frank, that was more of a thought off the top of my head. So I'd have to, if anybody's listening and hearing what I'm saying, I would say take what I said there loosely, because it's off the top of my head. But
sure, you're pontificating.
I'd have to think about it a little more, but maybe there is something there, maybe there's not. It sounds like SBC folks might say there is something there.
Yes, depends on, so even the SBC is split on this, so
yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
It's a big question. I was listening to back to an audiobook of J.D. Lionheart's Monotheism, which is this silly little book that attempts to take... He takes this really interesting, like, paradoxical interpretation of the Trinity and attempts to then apply it to a bunch of different areas of, you could say, like, Christian, like, big, hard questions and things like that. One of the things that he said in the midst of that in his discussion on the Trinity, which I thought was interesting, is so he's trying to make the point, or make the argument that the Trinity is a way of describing God as being both, you could say, statically and unmovingly being, right? Like, so like the ground of being, that, like, that static, unmoved mover kind of idea. And then also of being the ground of all time and history, and things that do move and change. So he's both being and he's becoming, is how he frames it. And then he says, but because being and becoming are so different from each other, they're diametrically opposed. In order to be both of those things, the third thing has to be its own thing too. So he says that that God is both being and becoming and both. He is all three, and he would say that the Spirit is the ground of both being and becoming that unites being and becoming together. And then he made one of the, it's funny because it's almost like kind of a play the way it's written. So one of the characters then says, "Oh, you mean like a family?" And I think this argument has been used before. This idea of like a mom and a dad come together, and out of their union comes the child. The child is you could say is fully the child of the mom and fully the child of the dad, and in that case has a split of genetics between the two, but is distinctly its own person as well. The child is not just like an amalgamation of the parents; it's its own person. He's his own person. And so I think that that's like a fascinating analogy. I don't know that I wouldn't pull it too far. Again, all analogies break down, but it is kind of an interesting way of thinking about how God can be three persons and also have one character. We had a little technical difficulties there, and but we did get a little cameo with Briar, which was really fun. So thank you, Eric, for that.
Yep.
That was very cute. So I think one of the things I'd love to talk about is again the purpose of marriage. Why did God instantiate this to begin with? What is the aim of marriage? What is it seeking to do?
Man, another good question. You came with the heat today, huh?
I did. I'm grilling you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
For
Nate.
one, I don't think that there's just one. I think that there are several like really good answers to that question that play together. So I think for one, the first one and the one that we should say as Christians, like the purpose of marriage is ultimately to glorify God in all areas of our life, including in our relationships. And so that can go down to basically any level you want, on a emotional level, a physical level, a societal level. Like people are better, relationships are better when they are monogamous, and when they are seeking to uphold their covenantal vows, to unite as one flesh. Like that is not only when the joy of the Lord is present in a marriage, but also that's when two people are just like fully in love with one another and in love with God, because God is not only the sustainer, but also the one who set it in motion, and the one that we're all striving to be more like. So the first answer is honoring God, to love God, and then I would say more so on like a pragmatic level, like a purpose in marriage is to raise children, and to raise children in the fear of the Lord. Ultimately, I think right now I'm reading, where that answer comes from is right now I'm reading a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and it is a fascinating read. It has more so to do with technology and social media and how it impacts Gen Z and children in general. But one thing it's getting at is parental involvement. And I was just talking with a guy today who's working as a teacher right now, and he mentioned a statistic that I can't remember the exact stat, so I won't say a number, but he said that the number one success marker, or the number one marker of success in a student's life, is parental involvement. So
Wow.
when a child has parents that want to be involved in their studies or just their life or their sports or whatever, that child is more likely to succeed. So I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's pretty much just like an exponential, like, I don't know if there's a curve off where too much parental involvement hampers that, but for the most part, the more parental involvement, the more success that child will see. And so when you talk about the purpose of a marriage, for one, we know that the results of becoming one flesh are children. So one of the purposes of a covenantal marriage, uniting as one flesh, one of the, I guess, I don't know, byproducts, that is not the right word, but you could say that God set it up so that a purpose of joining as one flesh is children. So that is just the biological process. That's how we're created. That's how we're made. That's how God set it up. So you could argue that that's a purpose of marriage. And then another purpose is to raise those children right. So raise those children in the knowledge and the fear of the Lord. That'd be my kind of broad purpose of marriage answer.
Great. Thanks. Eric, what about you? That was good. I have some pushback in a second, but I'll do that after Eric.
Yeah, sorry, I'm scatterbrained, so I was a little... I didn't hear the first part of what you said, Nate, but basically were you talking about one purpose or one end of marriage is rearing children? Is that kind of what you were saying in a nutshell?
Yeah, glorify God and raise them kids.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's there in Genesis 1. Like what the first thing in Genesis 1 that God tells man and woman to do after he says he created them in male and female, both of them in his image, is to be fruitful and multiply. So Obviously it's not fully fleshed out what you were saying there from what I caught in Genesis 1. It will be later in other canonical readings, but it's there in Genesis 1, I would say. My mind went in a different direction when you asked the question, Jacob. I was still thinking more Genesis 2. And so, like, I think the first thing you asked, or correct me if I'm wrong, but you said, like, why did God create marriage?
Yeah.
And there's two things I think I want to say in response to that. The first is, I don't think we entirely know, like, for sure, why God did it. It doesn't exactly say, and God created marriage for this reason. It's the same thing. Like, we were just in one of my classes, we were kind of discussing the doctrine of election and predestination, and from a Reformed perspective, one could ask, like, well, why did God elect certain people and not others? And on some level, it's just because that's what he chose to do. And people can say that, if they don't believe in a certain view of predestination and election, you can say that about other things as well, other doctrines as well. Well, God just chose it to do that way because he's God. He has the authority and the right to do so. So I think there's some element of that in why God created marriage.
So mystery.
There's some mystery, yeah, for sure. I think it's probably fair to say that in the same breath of what I was kind of saying earlier is I think it's probably supposed to reflect something about himself. In the beginning, when all things were created, after he creates everything in the universe step by step as it works through, he says that it's good. And the reason that it's good is because it reflects he did it. It reflects something about him. The perfection, the unity, the goodness that is within him. Without God, we don't know what that is. I think like a great quote, I think it's from Crime and Punishment with Dostoevsky. He's particularly speaking of morals.
Great book.
Yeah. I just saw it at the store. I almost bought it, but I didn't because I figured you could find it for free online. But anyways, he says something along the lines of, I don't have the quote in front of me or in my head, but if there is no God, all things are permitted. And that's because if there is no God, we don't know what is good and what is evil. There's no way to distinguish. Essentially, you're left with moral relativism if there is no ultimate authority that gives us a basis to distinguish between what is good and what is not. So that's long-winded to say that marriage, in some capacity, because God instituted it and created it, is supposed to reflect his goodness, his glory in some sort of way. I think that's probably fair to say. And then the last thing I was going to say, and where my mind originally went, was one reason that he gives in Genesis 2 that I think works here in answer to your question is he said it's not good for man to be alone. So
I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah.
I was going to say we might not know why he blessed marriage in this way, but we do know why he created Eve was because man was made in the image of God, and God exists in relationship to himself, right?
Yeah.
3 but 1.
Yeah.
So he is relationship, and so if we're created in his image, we are also created for relationships. And it's not good for us to be alone.
And the way I'm
absolutely.
kind of seeing it here right now in real time in Genesis as well, is I don't think when God says it's not good that man should be alone, that it's necessarily referring only to the feeling of loneliness either. Like, I don't think God's saying, wow, like man sitting there. He might be, but at least as I'm seeing it right now, it doesn't seem like he's saying like, oh man, look at Adam and like sitting in the corner over there, like being so lonely all the time. Like,
sad boy hours.
Yeah, it's like listen to sad songs and in tears in a puddle over there. I don't think that's what's going on.
Eating ice cream.
It's interesting because it comes right after it says that God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it, exercise dominion, as it says, building up to this point. And then after that, it says, then after it establishes that, it said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him. And people dispute that word helper. I'm well aware of it, whatever. But nevertheless, I think what's going on there is there's actual real world outworkings and applications that come from man not being alone and forming the union of marriage with one another. Is they form a bond that actually does stuff in the world, that actually exercises that dominion and outreach that it was just talking about previously in Genesis 1. And so I think God had not only the purpose of union in mind, at least as I'm seeing it right now, but when God says that man shouldn't be alone and that the union becomes formed, they actually go out and they work together. They are in harmony with one another, exercising that authority God bestowed on them as a organized unit as well. So
co-laborers.
yeah.
Cool. Well, let me push back just a little bit. I know both of you care a lot about procreation and think of that as a central aspect of marriage. So, question would be, do you believe that somebody who is, or a couple who are married and have decided not to have kids for some purpose, are violating a core tenet of marriage? Is it not a real marriage? Is it, is it a deficient marriage?
Well, that's interesting, because I thought you were going to go in the route of like a couple that can't have children.
No, I think all of us would say that somehow that's permissive, because it's not volitional. It's not chosen.
Right, exactly. And that's it's just a reality of our world. That's evidence that something is wrong or off. So that's what I was preparing for. But a couple that chooses not to have children.
Man, that's a hard question. And I'll try to be as open as possible. I'm still undecided on this topic, to be open. But
Thanks
I'll
for being
speak
honest.
Yeah, I'll speak where I'm at right now. And you know what, if you want to push back on me and maybe I can do some learning, that would be good. I certainly would not use the language of deficiency as you just did, or like there's anything wrong with somebody who's making such a choice. I'm on the fence of whether or not there's underlying sin in such a choice, because I do at the moment hold a stronger view of what Nate said earlier, with procreation being an ultimate end as to what marriage is seeking to achieve, because of texts like Genesis 1 and God's command of them to be fruitful and multiply, as I'll just say it's seemingly as an end to what marriage is geared towards.
It's also just it is the biological reality. It's just how we're wired. That in a marriage, when two become one, the likely result of that is children. There's no denying that. And then if people can't have children, that's something else. That's
absolutely nobody. As Jacob said, nobody denies that.
Totally.
And then you pile on top of that just all of the texts, Old and New Testament, speaking so highly of children and what it does for the family unit. In the process of sanctification, because ultimately that's what children do to your marriage. They sanctify it. They help you to grow in so many ways that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise, in my opinion, if I'm just being straightforward. At least that's how it's worked for me personally. So, and that's not to say that those who are without kids are deficient in their sanctification process. Of course, you could be sanctified even beyond perhaps somebody who's married, if God so chooses to give you the grace in that way, in the way that you're living and exposed in your life. However, I think there's a categorical difference in the way sanctification plays out when you are within a marriage and have kids as well. Is the humblest answer I think I can provide. So I kind of I lost my train of thought a little bit, to be honest, but
Well, I think you answered the question really well.
so yeah, I mean, oh yeah, I was just saying that the text that speaks so highly of children, and you think of how Jesus treated children as well in his time on earth. It's so crystal clear how highly he saw children as he lived his life as well. When you all those things considered, it's strange to me, like, to have such a high view of children, and obviously that's accomplished through marriage, the way God has designed marriage to be. For somebody to look at that and just say, no, that's not for me. Like I don't want to do that. I can't sit here. The reason why I said earlier that I'm hesitant to ascribe sin to it, I don't know for sure. But the reason I said that earlier is because, like, in today's culture, and I'm not accusing everybody of this, but we live in an awful selfish culture today, just to be blunt. And a lot of people that are saying those things have that sort of mindset towards children are doing so because they see them as a burden, and they see them in not only just financial ways too, but in practical ways as well. They're like, I don't want to change a diaper, I don't want to do, you name it, and that's usually the approach that I find with people in the past that I've spoken to that are anti-children. So and that I would say verges on a sinful attitude, to be honest. So
I would call that a sinful attitude.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd be in line with Eric, because there are people who have children, and that's, again, like, having children is not the sanctifying act. Because you can have children and then treat them horribly, and that is a different sin. Like, that's a different kind of sin.
Thank you for noting that, Nate. That's good.
Good.
That leads me to think that, okay, there's something else happening underneath the surface. So for somebody or for a married couple that says, particularly a Christian married couple, that says we don't want to have kids, it's like, okay, but why? Because I think that will lead to maybe answering some other questions of, like, oh, well, I see them as a burden. Like, I don't want to have the financial burden. So it can come back.
And they wouldn't even put it that way. It has more to do with they have a lifestyle in view in their mind for how they would like to live, and they see kids as getting in the way of that, which is why we say they see it as a burden. Right.
Right. And all of that comes back to being selfish in some way or another. So it's like, you again, because it is just the biological reality of sexual relations, children, I think that people who are married in particular, and Christian couples that are married in particular, that want to be married for the to please society, or in view of society, so that they can have sex and not have children. I don't know. I think that leads that. I don't think that is a sin in and of itself, but I think that is indicative of maybe some sin buried deeper beneath the surface, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And again,
I
not
like
all
that.
Couples, but definitely some.
I think it's a better way of putting it. Yeah, very and this is a delicate topic.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Right.
I want to acknowledge that, but that was a good way of putting it, Nate.
Yeah. No, thank you guys. That was great. I have heard before people say, like, to not have kids as a married couple unless you're, like, barren is like unacceptable and sinful. And I was like, that just feels like it's too hard, or it's miscategorizing. But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, what other than kind of that, like, desire to remain unburdened to some degree is leading people to that conclusion. So I think there are instances where people get married and decide to expend their resources rather than on married couples on, let's say, their they're a big part of their church's youth group and are sponsoring kids that way, or they go and like are fostering kids, or you know, there's other ways that you can engage with children, welcome the children, and be a big part of that. I think that are equivalent, or if not, at least scratch that itch, that need for welcoming the children. But
totally.
I think that if it's just like I don't like them, I don't want to be around them, then it's like that's a problem.
Yeah, here's a supporting point. I would say that the same call exists for non-married individuals who are not having kids. Like, so people who don't have kids, are not getting married, they don't want kids, I would say they are not exempt from
welcoming the children.
From welcoming the children in particular, like, or just being a fatherly, motherly figure to those around them in general.
Right.
The paternal, maternal office is still an office for all of us to hold. So, like, I don't think anybody is really exempt from the call to impact those around them. You know, like, that's especially Christians, because we're called to love God and love our neighbor. And like, we see how Christ welcomes children during his ministry. And I think that Christians in general are also called to, for one, welcome the neighbor and just take on at least some sort of mentor role in their life.
Great.
That's one way that they love their community. For
sure. Eric, you've got a head, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are gonna wrap up or keep talking, but I gotta.
I'll talk.
Be faithful in my marriage.
yeah. This is a good episode to leave in the middle of because he's got to go help his wife. So, all right. So, thanks, Eric.
Yep.
We love you.
Yep.
So I have been kind of quiet on my own views and all this stuff. So I'll share a little bit of that before I close up here. I think that the essence of marriage is to create a living icon of the devotion between the church and Christ, between two people. I think that that I get that from Ephesians 5, which talks about this very passage that we were talking about, the wedding of Adam and Eve, and says that this was not actually about Adam and Eve at all, or about us in general, but about Christ and the church, and that's its central meaning. And so, as I look at that, I think that's probably the aim. And then what also comes to mind is in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says that each, let's see, I want to get the exact verse here. So it says, now, for matters you wrote about, it is not good for man to have sexual relations with a woman, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. And this is the important part. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive one another, except by mutual consent for a time, so that you may pray, and then come together again. So the point that I think is important from that is that we are not our own anymore in marriage. Marriage is a way of practicing giving yourself away to somebody else, and in that way, I would say it's maybe the best way to describe it is something like mutual slavery. It's something where you are granting access to your personhood, authority of your personhood to the other. And I think the body is the most clear sense of that, but I do believe it goes beyond that. I think you give yourself to your spouse, and your spouse gives themselves to you. And in that way, it's about learning to live submitted to somebody else, learning to live as if the other person's will for you, the other person's desires for you, is more important than your desires for yourself. And I think in that sense, it's actually one of the high callings and one of the most fertile grounds for discipleship if it's taken seriously. That being said, most people don't take it seriously, and most people turn it in on itself, so that it's that each person is trying to get something from their spouse and not really wanting to yield This is why you have a lot of fighting in marriage. And so I think that the ideal for it is not always practiced, but the ideal is a mutual servanthood, a mutual slavery, a mutual submission to one another. And that being said, that is I would say the icon of what God in Christ does for the church. He gives himself away to the church, and the church then in response gives herself to Christ. So that would be my attempt at understanding what marriage is. I'm not married, so, womp womp.
Jay, I mean, that I would say you almost have a deeper understanding of it than Eric and I, because that was just beautifully put. Eric and I have more practice at it, but
yes, you do, and that's really what matters, actually.
Which is really good.
Yeah, I can say nice words, but you guys do it, so.
Well, right. I mean, so marriage is both, something that you work out every single day of your life, and it is an ideal to strive towards. So,
sure.
If you don't have a compass or at least an end goal, you're gonna wander wherever your own desire takes you.
Yeah.
So with Christ and the way that He loves the church. And by the way, I kept saying Hebrews earlier. I meant Ephesians. I was thinking of the priesthood of Christ.
Yeah.
And the priesthood of the believer. And I, for some reason, Hebrews just got stuck in my mind. But Eric and you both said Ephesians, so I meant Ephesians. My bad.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I'll dub over it in the audio. I'll just be like, in this Ephesians.
That'd be great. So yeah, like the way that Christ loves the church, that ultimately being our X on the map, so to speak, our goal that we're striving towards. And it's a daily journey to deny your own desires and try and fulfill the ones of your spouse. So this is like totally random and it might not even apply, but I was just thinking about this because I was talking to Lauren, my lovely wife, the other day, and I was saying, I think every married couple should get a dog before they have children, just for the practice of denying yourself.
Yeah.
Because
I'll take him out.
A dog, oh my gosh, I never knew how selfish I was, even in my marriage. We were married before we got a dog, and I didn't even realize how selfish I was until I got a dog, and until I was shown how unwilling I am to put the dog's need before mine. Yeah. And so that was an awakening in and of itself. But then I still take care of the dog because I love the dog, and not because the dog serves me in any particularly useful way, but because I see my little puppy as having inherent worth, inherent value. And so I want to love my dog because it has inherent worth. It's a creation of the Lord, and because if I don't, he'll suffer if I don't feed him, if I don't give him water, if I don't take him out, if he poops all over his area. But then that also creates suffering.
Well, that's his own fault.
So, that too.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great
anyway,
piece of advice.
It's a little practice in patience, a little practice in dying to yourself. But marriage is also similar in that way. I wasn't gonna say that getting a wife is like getting a dog, because I wouldn't ever say that.
Good Lord, no.
But marriage is almost it's like that practice of dying to yourself every day for the will of the other. My dog example is just a lesser version of that, because obviously your wife or your husband is so much more valuable than your dog. So, like you said, a marriage is incredibly fertile grounds for discipleship. I love that. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one last little thing, and then I'll wrap us up here. I've mentioned that there was like a little epiphany when Eric was talking about the directional hey, or the directive hey, at the end of Ish, so Isha, and that actually is toward man, which is interesting. I do think that there are contexts. I could be wrong on this. It's been so long since I've studied Hebrew. I do think there are some contexts where it can be directive away from as well. And I think the context of specifically that verse is talking, I will call her woman, or like You could almost say like, I will call her to man. That might be a better way of translating it for us, right? Or toward the man, because she comes from man. That's weird. That's a weird like translation because it's like opposite directions. But I do think that it's interesting, just like as a little note, if we think about that verse as primarily referring to Christ and the church, which Ephesians 5 does point out to us is the real meaning of that text, then it's talking about the bride being directed toward Christ, and in some sense being directed out from Christ. And I think it's interesting because Christ is both the Word at the beginning, through whom all things are made, the one that you could say the womb of all creation. Christ is that Word, and then is also the Word that grabs us and brings us back to Himself, and unites us to God. So there's the from and the to. So that was just my little epiphany.
To break that down even further, so Christ is often referred to as the bridegroom, which we would translate today to as the groom. Don't get the bride, mixed up in there. So and then the church is often seen as the bride, and so so out of Christ comes the church. Out of the groom, out of Adam comes Eve, the bride, and what you're saying, the directional, hey, the bride also is directed towards Christ. So out of Christ comes the church, and the church is,
and towards Christ goes the church.
Is towards Christ. That's beautiful. Wow.
Isn't that cool? Okay, I'm gonna go cool. Even one. Can I go one step further just for fun? For funsies? Okay, so remember, there's the added element. I think this is in the Gospel of John, that when Christ is dying on the cross and he's pierced with the spear, that blood and water comes out. Blood and water is a common representation of birth, right? And where is he stabbed?
In his side. Oh my gosh.
Yes, the birth of the church is out of the crucifixion of Christ. Comes out of his side, right? Also, just kind of another little element there. Oftentimes, people will take the blood and the water that come out of the side of Christ to be baptism in the Lord's Supper, the things which sustain the church, right? You could say the essence of the church. So the essence of the church comes out from the side of Christ, just as the original bride of Adam comes from his side. And actually, the word in Greek is the same one as the translation in the Septuagint for side. It's the same word. So I think there's something theological going on there. But anyways, that's just kind of a fun little typological note.
That is so beautiful. I mean, I just love the biblical imagery.
I know, right?
So cool.
So neat.
Man.
So anything last to say before we close up shop here?
I mean, disclaimer, we're not experts on marriage, but we
I
think all three of us.
That would the one not married guy is like, I'm an expert.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
what are you trying to say?
I got my PhD in marriage.
I would feel comfortable speaking for all three of us to say that we love marriage. We see marriage as a holy thing blessed by God. But that's not to say we're all perfect in it, and that's not to say that we're trying to cast blame or throw stones from a glass house or anything like that. We're not trying to make anybody feel bad. So I just want to say that for some reason, if you're listening and you're like, these guys suck or whatever, it's like, sorry, we don't know everything, but we love marriage and we want marriages to flourish, and we love the church, and so we see that as a beautiful representation of God's love to us. So yeah, man, this is kind of a cool conversation. It kind of went all over the place, but it was neat.
Well, that was my hope, and I think that I still have so many questions and ideas for more topics relating to this stuff. I would love to talk about LGBTQ stuff. I'd love to talk about divorce and remarriage. I'd love to talk about where sex belongs, and some of the weirder texts in Scripture about sex, gender roles, whether or not those exist and what they look like. Singleness in the church, like how do we navigate that? I love that we talked a little bit about that, at least in relation to welcoming the children today. So hopefully we'll get to come back to this, because this is a really deep topic, and it has a lot of purchase on our daily lives. So
totally.
So thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so at sophomoreosofficial@gmail.com. That's SOPHOMR. I got it wrong. No,
Oh,
I tried to go all auctioneer on it.
I just tuned out because I was like, Jacob's got this.
Yeah, and then I messed it up. SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. You can rate the podcast however you'd like it. I don't really care. I don't look at the ratings, and I refuse to. Leave a review. Again, I don't check them. And I just want an email. Somebody send me a freaking email, please. And as always, may Christ be